What would you do if the two people you trusted most, your mom and your fiancé, weren't just keeping secrets, but sharing the kind of secret that could tear your life apart? It sounds like something out of a shocking family drama, doesn't it? But for me, it wasn't fiction. It was real, raw, and devastating. I thought I had the perfect life. A loving fiancé, a mom who was my rock, and a future that felt solid. But all of that came crashing down when I uncovered their hidden betrayal. The truth broke me. It shattered my sense of trust, my faith in love, and even my belief in family. But it also forced me to face questions I never thought I'd have to answer. How do you heal when the people who hurt you are the ones you've always depended on? How do you move forward when your entire world feels like a lie? In today's video, I'm sharing my story. Not just the painful truth of what happened, but how I survived, rebuilt, and ultimately reclaimed my life. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you love, or if you're searching for strength in the aftermath of heartbreak, stick around. This isn't just a story about pain. It's a story about resilience, healing, and finding yourself again. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming life's toughest challenges. And let me know in the comments. Have you ever faced a betrayal that changed your life? You know how some moments in life feel like they belong in a fairy tale. That was me, standing in what I thought was the perfect chapter of my own story. I was engaged to the man of my dreams, Mark, a man who seemed to tick every box. He was charming, attentive, and the kind of person who could walk into a room and instantly become everyone's favorite. It wasn't just the chemistry between us. It was how he fit into my life so seamlessly. My family adored him, especially my mom. And looking back now, maybe a little too much. Mark and I met at a friend's wedding. Cliché, right? He caught the bouquet. Yes, literally. And handed it to me with a smile so perfect it could have been scripted. From that moment we were inseparable. We built a relationship that, from the outside, looked flawless. Weekend getaways, shared dreams of building a life together, and a proposal that felt like something out of a Nicholas Sparks novel. When he got down on one knee under the string lights in my parents' backyard, surrounded by family and friends, I couldn't have imagined a better moment. I mean, how could I have known that same backyard would later hold the echoes of betrayal? Then there was my mom, Linda. She's the kind of woman who walks into your life and leaves an impression. Strong, supportive, and fiercely loving. She wasn't just my mom, she was my best friend. Growing up, we shared everything. Late-night talks, road trips, even the occasional Netflix binge. When Mark came into the picture, it felt like he completed this unbreakable trio. My mom and Mark got along so well. I used to joke that she liked him more than me. Little did I know it wasn't a joke. Our family was close, and having Mark blend into that dynamic was the cherry on top. He'd spend hours helping my mom with her garden or chatting with her about the latest book she was reading. I saw it as a sign of his dedication to becoming part of my world, and I was proud of the relationship they shared. It was comforting to think that the two people I loved most could rely on each other as much as they relied on me. What could go wrong, right? Everything, apparently. As the wedding approached, life felt like a whirlwind of planning and Pinterest boards. My mom was my rock during the process, helping me choose flowers, dresses, and everything in between. Mark was involved, too, in his laid-back Mark way. He'd give a thumbs up to everything we picked, and we'd laugh about how chill he was. It didn't feel like a red flag at the time, just Mark being Mark. But now, looking back, I see those moments differently. The whispered conversations between the two of them, the inside jokes I wasn't part of, and the way his phone would light up at odd hours when my mom was around. I brushed it off. After all, why would I doubt either of them? They were my safe spaces, the people I trusted with every part of my life. If I started questioning them, what would that say about me? So, I did what most people do. I ignored the gut feeling, stuffed it down, and told myself I was being ridiculous. Funny how the heart knows what the mind refuses to see. It was in those quiet moments of denial that the cracks started to form. Not visible ones. Those would come later. But the kind that grow beneath the surface, slowly breaking apart the foundation of what you thought was unshakable. I didn't realize it at the time, but my picture-perfect life was already beginning to unravel. And when it finally fell apart, it would be in the most devastating way imaginable. If someone had told me back then that Mark and my mom's connection wasn't entirely innocent, I would have laughed it off. I mean, they were just close, right? It's normal for your fiancé and your mom to bond, especially when your family is tight-knit. At least, that's what I told myself every time I saw them sharing a laugh over coffee or trading glances during family dinners. Looking back, though, those moments weren't as harmless as I wanted to believe. Mark had this way of making people feel special, like they were the only person in the room. That's part of what drew me to him in the first place. So, when he directed that same energy toward my mom, I thought, great. He loves my family as much as I do. Didn't feel weird at first. In fact, I found it endearing how he'd help her with things my dad used to handle before he passed away. Fixing her leaky faucet, carrying heavy groceries, or even repairing her car when it wouldn't start. Mark was always there, stepping in like a son. Or so I thought. The first time I noticed something that made me pause was during a Sunday barbecue at my mom's house. I was inside prepping the salad, and through the kitchen window, I saw Mark and my mom chatting on the patio. At first, it looked like a normal conversation, but then I noticed how close they were standing. He leaned in slightly, his hand resting on the back of her chair. She laughed at something he said, and it wasn't her usual mom laugh, it was softer, more intimate. I shook my head and told myself, stop overthinking. They're just comfortable around each other. But those moments kept piling up. There was the time I came home early from work and found them sitting on the couch, deep in conversation. My mom's hand was on his arm, and they didn't notice me right away. When they did, they both jumped a little, like they'd been caught doing something they shouldn't. Mark quickly stood up, muttering something about needing to grab a drink, and my mom changed the subject so fast it gave me whiplash. Still, I didn't push. After all, what kind of person doubts their own mother? Then there were the excuses. Mark started dropping comments about how he needed to stop by my mom's house to help her with something. First, it made sense. She was living alone, and Mark was handy around the house. But as those visits became more frequent, I started feeling uneasy. I even joked with him once, "You see my mom more than I do." He laughed it off, saying, "She's like a second mom to me. You're lucky we get along so well." And I believed him because, well, why wouldn't I? I remember one particular evening when the three of us were watching a movie together. I was curled up on one end of the couch, and Mark was sitting in the middle, next to my mom. Halfway through the film, I noticed their arms were almost touching, and neither of them moved away. It was subtle, so subtle that I almost felt guilty for noticing. Why am I even thinking this? I scolded myself. They're just being comfortable. But the little things started to add up. Like how Mark's tone of voice would soften when he spoke to her, or how my mom seemed to light up every time he walked into the room. Then there were the inside jokes they shared, things I wasn't a part of, even though I was supposed to be the bridge between them. When I asked about it, they'd shrug it off as nothing, but the nagging feeling in my gut refused to go away. Still, I brushed it off. I didn't want to be that person, the one who ruins something good with unnecessary suspicion. Even my friends noticed how close they were. One of them joked, "Your mom and Mark are like besties now. That's cute." Or is it? It was meant to be light-hearted, but the words hit a little too close to home. I laughed it off, saying, "Yeah, they get along great," but deep down the seed of doubt was already growing. And yet I ignored it. Every instinct, every moment that made me pause, I buried it all under the weight of my own denial. Why? Because admitting there was something off would mean admitting my world wasn't as perfect as I thought. And that wasn't a truth I was ready to face. Not yet, anyway. It's funny how sometimes the truth doesn't hit you all at once. It sneaks up on you in pieces, little fragments of suspicion that slowly come together to paint a picture you desperately don't want to see. For me, the first piece of that puzzle was a text message. I wasn't snooping, I swear I wasn't. Mark's phone was sitting on the coffee table, buzzing away while he was in the shower. I glanced at the screen out of habit, expecting it to be something mundane like a work email or a message from one of his buddies. Instead, I saw a name that stopped me cold: Linda. Hey, Mom. First, I thought nothing of it. They texted occasionally. Harmless things about family events or asking for recipes. But the preview of the message felt off. It read, "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it." My heart dropped into my stomach. For a moment, I convinced myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe it was about dinner, a TV show they'd watched. But deep down I knew. Just knew. When Mark came back into the room, I acted normal. Well, as normal as someone could act while their mind was racing 1,000,000 miles per hour. I wanted to ask him about the message, but I didn't. I wasn't ready to hear whatever excuse he'd come up with. Or worse, the truth. So, I did what anyone would do when their world feels like it's tilting on its axis. I started paying closer attention. That week, I noticed more things that didn't add up. Mark's errands seemed to stretch longer than usual. My mom, who used to call me almost every day, suddenly seemed busier, her voice strained whenever we talked. When I casually asked what she'd been up to, she'd deflect with vague answers about errands or chores around the house. It wasn't like her to be so distant, and it only made my suspicions grow. Then came the phone call. It was late at night, and Mark had stepped outside to get some air. I didn't think much of it until I saw his reflection in the window. He was pacing in the yard, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice low but urgent. I couldn't hear much, but I caught snippets, words like "careful" and "no one knows." My chest tightened as I realized he wasn't talking to a coworker or friend. When he came back inside, I asked casually, "Who were you talking to?" He froze for a split second before replying, "Just a client. Nothing important." His smile was easy, but his eyes were guarded. And just like that, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. It wasn't long before I found myself scrolling through his phone late at night while he was asleep. I hated myself for it. What kind of person invades their partner's privacy like that? But I had to know. And what I found shattered me. Dozens of messages between Mark and my mom, some casual, others far from it. They talked about meeting up, about missing each other, about things I couldn't bring myself to read twice. My hands were shaking as I put the phone back down, my mind reeling from the confirmation of what I'd been dreading. But it didn't stop there. My curiosity, or maybe my need for closure, pushed me to dig deeper. I started noticing patterns. The times they were busy coincided a little too neatly, their excuses mirroring each other's in a way that felt rehearsed. And then, the final nail in the coffin, a receipt I found in Mark's jacket pocket. It was for a fancy restaurant, one I'd been begging him to take me to for months. The date: last Friday, when he'd told me he was working late. My mom had mentioned being out that evening too, something vague about meeting an old friend. My hands clenched the paper so tightly it crumpled, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps as the realization hit me like a freight train. I didn't know what to do. Confront them. Pretend I didn't know. I felt trapped, torn between the fear of what I might uncover and the unbearable weight of staying silent. Every time I saw them together, my heart ached with the knowledge of what they were hiding from me. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. The lies were everywhere, suffocating me, and I knew the truth wasn't going to stay buried for long. I'll never forget the moment when the truth was no longer just a suspicion, but an undeniable reality. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of day where everything feels peaceful, until it's not. I had gone to my mom's house unannounced, something I did often. She always told me I didn't need to call. Her door was always open. But that day, as I stepped onto the porch and reached for the doorknob, I heard voices inside. Familiar voices. Mark's deep tone, followed by my mom's unmistakable laugh. At first I smiled, thinking it was sweet that they were spending time together. Maybe he was helping her with something around the house again. But as I stood there, their laughter shifted into something else, something intimate. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob, as Mark said something I couldn't quite make out. My mom responded, her voice soft, almost coy. "You shouldn't say that here." That's when the air around me seemed to thicken, my heart pounding so hard it felt like my chest might burst. I pushed the door open, my mind racing with a mix of confusion, anger, and dread. The sight that greeted me was one I'll never be able to erase. They were sitting close, too close, on the living room couch. Mark's hand was resting on my mom's knee, and when they saw me, their faces drained of color. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that fills the room when every unspoken truth hangs heavy in the air. "What's going on here?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. Neither of them answered right away. Mark stood up, stammering something about it not being what it looks like, but his eyes betrayed him. My mom, always so composed, looked away, unable to meet my gaze. That was all the confirmation I needed. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My legs felt weak as I tried to process what I was seeing. "You've been lying to me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark tried to step toward me, his hands raised as if to calm me down, but I backed away. "Don't," I snapped, the word sharper than I intended. "How long has this been going on?" Neither of them answered. The silence felt like a slap in the face, worse than any words could have been. Finally my mom spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "It's not what you think." She tried to explain, but the words felt hollow, like she was grasping at straws. Mark chimed in, his excuses a blur of "it was a mistake, and we didn't mean for this to happen." I couldn't even process what they were saying. All I could think about was the sheer betrayal, the fact that the two people I trusted most had shattered my world in ways I never thought possible. The confrontation turned into a whirlwind of shouting, tears, and accusations. I demanded to know how it started, why it happened, and how they could possibly justify what they'd done. Mark admitted that it began months ago. Innocent at first, he claimed. He said they grew close because of me, bonding over shared moments in my absence. "It just happened," he said, his voice breaking as though he were the victim. My mom, my rock, my confidant, sat there silently, tears streaming down her face. But her silence said more than words ever could. I don't know how long I stayed in that living room, but every second felt like an eternity. Eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my legs trembling beneath me, and walked out without looking back. As I stepped outside, the fresh air hit me like a wave, but it did nothing to clear the suffocating weight in my chest. My mind was a storm of emotions: anger, disbelief, heartbreak. How could they? How could the two people I loved most betray me like this? Even as I drove away, their voices echoed in my mind, their excuses playing on a loop that only made me feel worse. I didn't just lose my fiancé that day. I lost my mom, my anchor, my sense of security. The devastating secret they'd been hiding wasn't just a betrayal. It was the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and family. But the worst part: this wasn't the end of it. The fallout from that moment would be far-reaching, touching every corner of my life in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. When the dust settled, if you can even call it that, I was left alone with a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. Betrayal isn't just an act. It's a storm that tears through every part of you. The anger, the heartbreak, the disbelief. They didn't come in waves like I'd expected. They came all at once, crashing into me with the force of a tidal wave. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls of my life were closing in on me. The trust one had built over years with both Mark and my mom was gone, shattered into pieces so small I couldn't imagine ever putting them back together. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in my head. Questioned everything. When did it start? Were there signs I missed? Was I so blind, so naive, that I didn't see what was right in front of me? I'd think back to moments that used to make me smile. The time Mark surprised me with flowers, or the way my mom and I would laugh until we cried over some silly inside joke. Now, those memories felt tainted, like they belonged to someone else, someone who hadn't been betrayed. And the self-doubt. That was the worst part. Betrayal doesn't just make you angry at the people who hurt you, it makes you angry at yourself. I kept thinking, how could I have let this happen? I replayed every conversation, every glance, every time I'd brushed off that nagging feeling in my gut. I felt stupid, weak, like I should have known better. It wasn't just my trust in them that was broken, it was my trust in myself. The emotional pain seeped into every part of my life. Work became unbearable. I couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes without my mind drifting back to that day in my mom's living room. Socializing was out of the question. I didn't want to see anyone, let alone explain what had happened. How do you even begin to tell someone that your fiancé and your mom had an affair? It felt like my betrayal story was too outrageous to be real, like something out of a bad soap opera. But this was my life, my heartbreak, and there was no escaping it. I tried to keep it together when I was around other people, but inside I was falling apart. The emotions were overwhelming, and they didn't come with a roadmap. One minute, I'd feel a burning rage, imagining all the ways I could make them pay for what they did. The next, I'd be sobbing uncontrollably, consumed by the loss of not just my relationship, but my family. It felt like a double-edged sword. Losing Mark was devastating enough, but losing my mom, that was a wound I wasn't sure would ever heal. Trust issues crept into every corner of my life. Even mundane interactions felt loaded with suspicion. If the barista got my coffee order wrong, I'd find myself wondering if they did it on purpose. If a coworker complimented me, I'd question their motives. The foundation of trust I'd built over a lifetime was gone, replaced by a constant gnawing doubt. And it wasn't just with strangers. I started questioning my friends too. Every time someone told me they were there for me, I couldn't help but think, are they? Or will they betray me too? The emotional fallout wasn't just internal. It started affecting the way I saw the world, the way I approached relationships and love. I used to believe in the idea of soulmates, in the kind of love that could conquer anything. But now, that belief felt like a cruel joke. Love to me had become synonymous with pain, with deception, with heartbreak. The idea of ever trusting someone again felt impossible, like trying to rebuild a house on a foundation made of sand. But the worst moments came when I let myself feel the loss fully. I'd sit in my apartment, surrounded by wedding magazines and plans for a future that no longer existed, and the weight of it all would hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just grieving the loss of Mark or my mom. I was grieving the version of myself that believed in them, that believed in happy endings. That version of me felt so far away, so irretrievably broken, that I wasn't sure if I'd ever find her again. Yet, even in the darkest moments, there was a flicker of something else. Anger. Not just at Mark and my mom, but at the situation itself. At the idea that this betrayal would define me, that it would leave me stuck in this place forever. It was that anger that eventually pushed me to start thinking about what came next, about how I could move forward. Because as much as I wanted to wallow in the pain, I knew deep down that staying there wouldn't bring me peace. But I wasn't there yet. I wasn't ready to let go of the hurt, not when it felt like the only thing I had left. I knew I couldn't carry the weight of what I'd uncovered without confronting them. It wasn't just about getting answers anymore. It was about reclaiming my sense of self, of control. They had stolen so much from me. My trust, my future, and the foundation of my family. I couldn't let them take my voice too. So I called both Mark and my mom, demanding they meet me at my apartment that evening. My voice was steady, but my hands trembled as I hung up. This was it, the moment everything would finally be laid bare. When they arrived, the tension in the air was so thick it felt suffocating. Mark walked in first, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something hesitant, almost fearful. My mom followed close behind, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. I stood in the center of the living room, my arms crossed, feeling a mixture of rage and heartbreak. I motioned for them to sit, but they hesitated like two kids caught breaking the rules. "We're going to talk about this," I said, my voice firm despite the lump in my throat. For a moment, none of us said anything. The silence was unbearable, and I could feel my emotions bubbling to the surface. Finally, I broke it. "How long?" I asked, my voice shaking. Neither of them looked at me. Mark stared at the floor, while my mom fidgeted with her hands. "How long has this been going on?" I repeated, louder this time, my anger cutting through the air like a knife. Mark was the first to speak. "It wasn't planned," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't mean for it to happen." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound surprising even me. "Didn't mean for it to happen? You didn't mean to sleep with my mother, Mark?" My words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. He flinched but didn't reply. My mom finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." Her words felt hollow, like she was reading from a script. "A mistake," I snapped, my voice rising. "A mistake is spilling coffee on someone. What you two did wasn't a mistake, it was a choice." Over and over again. The confrontation spiraled into a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, desperation. Mark tried to justify his actions, saying they'd grown close because of how much they both loved me. "It started as just talking," he said, his voice shaking. "We were both going through things and it escalated." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You were going through things," shouted. "What about what I'm going through now because of you?" My mom's excuses were just as infuriating. She talked about feeling lonely after my dad passed, about how Mark had been there for her in ways no one else was. "I didn't plan for this to happen," she said again, as if that made it any better. "You didn't plan for it," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "But you sure didn't stop it, did you?" The more they talked, the more enraged I became. Every word felt like a dagger, cutting deeper into wounds that were already raw. But amidst the anger there was something else, something I hadn't expected: pity. As I looked at them, squirming under the weight of their own guilt, I realized how pathetic they both seemed. They weren't the people I had put on pedestals. They were flawed, selfish, and deeply broken. And in that moment, I decided I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. "I don't want to hear another word," I said finally, my voice cold and steady. "You've both said enough." I stood up, my legs shaky but firm. "Mark, we're done. You can pack your things and leave tonight." He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "And you," I said, turning to my mom, "I don't know how we come back from this. Right now, I can't even look at you." They tried to plead, to explain, but I was done listening. For the first time since the truth came out, I felt a small sense of power returning to me. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into forgiving something I wasn't ready to forgive. As they left, one after the other, the silence that filled the apartment was deafening. But for the first time it wasn't suffocating, it was liberating. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, even if it meant starting from scratch. Of course, the confrontation didn't erase the pain or the scars they left behind. But it was a turning point the moment I stopped being a victim and started fighting for myself. Little did I know, the fallout from this confrontation would ripple through every aspect of my life in ways I wasn't prepared for. When you think about family, you imagine a foundation, something solid, unshakable, a place you can always turn to. But after what happened, my family felt more like a fragile house of cards that had come crashing down. The revelation of the affair didn't just affect me. It sent shockwaves through everyone connected to us. My once tight-knit family became a fractured mess, and I was left standing in the rubble, trying to make sense of it all. The first cracks appeared when I told my siblings, sitting them down to explain that our mom, had an affair with my fiancé was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. They looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, their disbelief mirroring the shock I'd felt when I first found out. My younger brother kept shaking his head, saying, "No, not Mom. She wouldn't do that." My older sister, usually the calm, rational one, exploded with anger, her words spilling out faster than I could process. "What the hell is wrong with her?" "With both of them," she demanded. Their reactions were like watching a mirror of my own emotions: denial, anger, heartbreak. It didn't stop there. My mom's betrayal created a ripple effect that tore through our family dynamics. Some of my relatives tried to stay neutral, but even that felt like a betrayal in itself. "It's complicated," they'd say, as if that excused her actions. Others outright condemned her, refusing to attend family gatherings if she was going to be there. Thanksgiving, which used to be a time of laughter and togetherness, became a battlefield of silent tension and carefully chosen words. People took sides, and those who stayed silent only fueled the divide. I found myself avoiding family events altogether. The thought of sitting in the same room as my mom, pretending everything was fine, was unbearable. But staying away came with its own kind of pain. Family wasn't supposed to be like this. We were supposed to be stronger than any obstacle. Yet here we were, splintered beyond recognition because of her choices and his. The betrayal also left me feeling isolated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Friends who used to call regularly started pulling away, unsure of what to say or how to act around me. Some admitted they didn't want to take sides, as if my pain was a debate and not a reality. Others made awkward comments like, "Well, at least you found out before the wedding," as if that was supposed to make everything better. Their inability to truly understand what I was going through only deepened the loneliness. But it wasn't just the emotional fallout that made everything so hard, it was the public aspect of it. The scandal became something of a whispered story among our extended family, and even in the small community where we lived. People looked at me with a mix of pity and curiosity, their eyes asking questions they didn't dare voice aloud. "Did you hear what happened to her?" became the unspoken question hanging in every room I entered. It was humiliating, like my heartbreak was a spectacle for others to dissect. The pressure of it all started to weigh on me in ways I hadn't expected. I became hyper-aware of every interaction, every conversation, worried that people were judging me for staying silent, for not cutting ties with my mom completely, or for not publicly shaming Mark. But what no one seemed to understand was that I was already fighting battles on so many fronts. I was trying to piece together my life, process the betrayal, and somehow rebuild my sense of self in the aftermath of their actions. And then there were the people who tried to help. Some offered unsolicited advice that only added to my frustration. "You need to forgive her," they'd say, as if forgiveness was a magic wand that could erase the pain. Others suggested I confront her again, push her for answers I wasn't ready to hear. Their well-meaning but misguided attempts to fix the situation only reminded me how broken everything was. The ripple effects of the betrayal didn't just end with family and friends. It seeped into every corner of my life. I began questioning the very idea of family itself. If the people who were supposed to love and protect you could betray you so deeply, what did that say about anyone else? The once bright memories of family vacations, holidays, and birthdays now felt like cruel reminders of a time when I believed we were untouchable. Through it all, I couldn't escape the lingering question: how do you rebuild a family after something like this? Was it even possible? Or were we destined to remain broken, each of us carrying our own pieces of the fallout? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for certain: The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. And as I started to navigate that road, I realized the healing had to start somewhere, even if I wasn't sure where that somewhere was. Letting go sounds simple in theory, but when it's your reality, it feels like trying to break free from chains you've worn your whole life. For weeks after the confrontation, I wrestled with the question: how do you walk away from people who've defined so much of who you are? Mark wasn't just my fiancé, he was my partner, my future, the person I thought I'd spend forever with. And my mom. She wasn't just a parent. She was my best friend, my safe place, my everything. Cutting them out felt like amputating parts of myself. But I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of their betrayal. Ending things with Mark was both the easiest and the hardest decision I've ever made. Easy because his actions left no room for doubt. I couldn't marry someone who had not only cheated but done so with my own mother. Hard because walking away meant letting go of all the dreams we'd built together. I didn't just lose a person. I lost a vision of the life we'd planned. The mornings sipping coffee on the porch, the vacations we'd mapped out, the children we'd talked about. All of it was gone in an instant. The breakup itself was brutal. Mark begged for another chance. His words dripping with desperation. I made a mistake, he said over and over, as if repeating it would somehow make it true. He promised to change, to make it up to me, to spend the rest of his life proving he was worthy of my forgiveness. But I'd heard enough lies to last a lifetime. Forgiveness might come someday, but reconciliation, that was out of the question. You didn't just betray me, I told him, my voice trembling. You destroyed everything we had. There's no coming back from that. Packing up his things was like ripping off a bandage over and over again. Every item, a sweatshirt, a book, a photo, was a reminder of what we'd lost. I left his box of things by the door, telling him to pick it up when I wasn't home. Seeing him again felt unbearable, like reopening a wound that was barely beginning to heal. When he finally came to collect his belongings, I made sure I was far away, giving myself the space I needed to breathe, to start letting go. Letting go of my mom was an entirely different kind of pain. She was my mom. How do you just cut off the person who gave you life, who raised you, who loved you in ways no one else could? For weeks, I tried to reconcile my love for her with the pain she'd caused. Every time my phone buzzed with her name, my heart ached. I couldn't bring myself to answer. Her messages ranged from tearful apologies to desperate attempts to explain, but I wasn't ready to hear them. I wasn't ready to open that door again. Eventually I had to set boundaries. I wrote her a letter, because speaking to her felt impossible, and laid everything out. I told her how much she'd hurt me, how her actions had shattered the foundation of our relationship. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I wrote. But for now I need space. I need time to heal without you in my life. Writing those words felt like breaking my own heart, but I knew it was necessary. Healing couldn't happen while the wounds were still being poked. Walking away from both Mark and my mom left a void I didn't know how to fill. The loneliness was overwhelming, like a constant ache that wouldn't go away. But in that loneliness, I started to find clarity. I realized that holding on to toxic relationships, no matter how much love they once held, was like drinking poison and expecting to feel better. Letting go wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about survival. It was about choosing myself for the first time in a long time. I started small. I deleted photos, threw away mementos, and stopped replaying conversations in my head. I surrounded myself with people who supported me, who reminded me that I was more than the pain I'd been through. Therapy became a lifeline, a place where I could unpack the layers of betrayal and begin to rebuild my sense of self. My therapist helped me understand that letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant freeing myself from the hold their actions had on me. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to pick up the phone, to call Mark or my mom, to demand answers or closure or something. Anything that would make the pain go away. But I knew that no conversation could fix what they'd broken. Closure wasn't something they could give me. It was something I had to find within myself. As time passed, I began to see glimpses of who I was before all of this. I rediscovered parts of myself I'd forgotten, the things I loved, the dreams I'd put on hold. Letting go wasn't just about ending toxic relationships. It was about creating space for something new, something better. It was about reclaiming my life piece by piece, and learning that sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the most necessary. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a messy, winding path filled with setbacks and small victories. After everything fell apart, I wasn't sure where to begin. How do you heal from something that feels like it's ripped you apart at the seams? I didn't have the answer then, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay stuck in the pain. If I didn't start rebuilding, the betrayal would continue to control my life, and I refused to let that happen. Therapy became my first step. Sitting across from a stranger and unpacking the layers of betrayal was daunting at first, but it quickly became a lifeline. My therapist didn't just listen. She gave me tools to process the emotional turmoil that had taken over my life. One of the most profound lessons she taught me was that healing isn't about erasing the pain. It's about learning to live with it in a way that doesn't define you. The betrayal isn't who you are, she said during one session. It's something that happened to you. There's a difference. Rebuilding trust, though, was an entirely different beast. After being betrayed by the two people I trusted most, I found myself questioning everyone and everything. A simple compliment from a coworker felt like a potential manipulation. An invitation to coffee from a friend made me wonder what they really wanted. Trust had been so natural before, but now it felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I had to relearn what it meant to trust, slowly, cautiously, and with a healthy dose of boundaries. One exercise my therapist suggested was journaling about moments when people showed me kindness or reliability. First, it felt silly, almost forced. But as I started to write, I realized how many small acts of trustworthiness were happening around me every day. A friend who showed up with coffee when I was having a bad day. A coworker who covered for me without expecting anything in return. These moments didn't erase the betrayal, but they reminded me that not everyone in my life was out to hurt me. Self-care also became a crucial part of my healing journey. I'd spent so much time putting others first, Mark, my mom, even the idea of our family, that I'd forgotten how to take care of myself. I started small. A walk in the park, an afternoon spent reading, a bubble bath with my favorite playlist in the background. These little acts of self-love became anchors in a world that often felt overwhelming. They reminded me that I deserved care and kindness, even if I had to give it to myself. Rebuilding trust also meant redefining what I wanted in relationships, romantic and otherwise. I started to understand the importance of boundaries, something I'd always struggled with before. I learned that it's okay to say no, to walk away from people or situations that don't serve you. Trust doesn't mean blind faith. It means knowing when to open up and when to protect yourself. It's a balance, and one I'm still learning to navigate. As I moved through the healing process, I began to rediscover parts of myself I thought I'd lost. I took up painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I joined a yoga class, not because I thought it would fix me, but because it felt good to move my body in a way that was gentle and intentional. These small steps reminded me that there was a life waiting for me beyond the pain, a life filled with joy, creativity, and possibility. One of the most significant breakthroughs came when I stopped seeing forgiveness as a destination. For so long, I thought healing meant forgiving Mark and my mom. But forgiveness isn't a requirement for healing. It's a choice, and one I wasn't ready to make. Instead, I focused on forgiving myself. For missing the signs. For staying silent when I should have spoken up. For not walking away sooner. Letting go of that self-blame was one of the hardest but most liberating parts of the journey. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when I questioned whether I'd ever truly trust again. But those days became fewer and farther between as time went on. Little by little I started to rebuild, not just trust but my belief in love, in family, and in myself. It wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about learning to carry it without letting it crush me. Healing is still a work in progress. There are moments when the pain resurfaces, when a memory catches me off guard, or a song brings tears to my eyes. But those moments don't define me anymore. They're just pieces of a story I'm learning to live with. And as I move forward, I'm finding that the best way to rebuild trust isn't by looking to others. It's by trusting myself to choose better, to protect my heart, and to keep moving forward. Starting over felt daunting, like standing at the edge of a vast, empty space with no idea where to step next. For so long, my life had been built around Mark and my family, around the dreams and plans we'd made together. When all of that was stripped away, I felt lost, like I didn't even know who I was without them. But in that emptiness, I began to see something else. A chance to rebuild, not just my life but myself. The first step was learning to embrace the idea that life after betrayal wasn't just possible. It could be beautiful. At first, that seemed impossible to believe. Every time I tried to picture the future, all I saw was the pain and anger I was carrying with me. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to notice small changes. A morning walk that felt peaceful instead of heavy. A laugh that escaped me unexpectedly while watching a silly TV show. These tiny moments of joy became seeds, slowly growing into a new sense of hope. I decided to take control of my narrative. For too long, I'd let the betrayal define me, shaping how I saw myself and the world around me. But I realized that while I couldn't change what happened, I could choose how I responded to it. That's when I started setting goals. Not grand, sweeping changes, but small, tangible steps that made me feel like I was moving forward. I signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. I started journaling every morning, using the pages to untangle my thoughts and rediscover what truly mattered to me. Work became another anchor. I threw myself into my career, not as a distraction, but as a way to reclaim my sense of purpose. I set new professional goals, took on projects that challenged me, and allowed myself to feel proud of my accomplishments again. It was empowering to focus on something that was entirely mine, separate from the pain of the past. Friendships, too, became a vital part of my healing. I leaned on people who had been there for me all along, even when I'd been too wrapped up in my own pain to notice. I reconnected with old friends, reaching out to people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some of those conversations were awkward at first, but they reminded me of the person I used to be before everything fell apart, the person I was slowly finding my way back to. Romance, however, was a different story. For a long time, the idea of opening my heart to someone new felt impossible. How could I trust again when the people I'd trusted most had hurt me so deeply? But over time I realized that not everyone was Mark. Not everyone was capable of the kind of betrayal I'd experienced. I started to allow myself the possibility of love, not as something to chase, but as something to welcome if it came along naturally. What surprised me most was how much I learned about myself in the process. I discovered strength I didn't know I had. Resilience that carried me through the darkest days. I realized that I didn't need a partner or a perfect family to feel whole. For the first time in years I felt like I was enough, just me, flaws and all. One of the most powerful moments came when I revisited the places that once held so much pain. The park where Mark proposed. The coffee shop where my mom and I used to spend hours talking. At first, those places felt like wounds I wasn't ready to reopen. But as I stood there, I realized they didn't hold power over me anymore. They were just places, chapters in a book I was ready to close. As I moved forward, I began to embrace the idea of creating a new life, one that wasn't dictated by the pain of the past. I started dreaming again, planning trips I'd always wanted to take, exploring hobbies I'd never made time for. I even adopted a dog, a scrappy little rescue named Charlie who brought more joy into my life than I ever thought possible. He became a daily reminder that life is about finding happiness in the small, unexpected moments. This new chapter isn't perfect, and it's not always easy. There are still days when the memories creep back in, when the weight of what I went through feels heavier than I can bear. But those days are fewer now, and they don't define me the way they used to. I've learned that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about finding a way to carry the past without letting it hold you back. The life I'm building now is far from the one I imagined with Mark and my family. But in many ways it's better. It's mine, shaped by my choices, my passions, and my strength. Rising from the ashes of betrayal wasn't something I ever wanted to do, but it's made me into someone I'm proud to be. And as I look ahead, I see a future that's bright, not because it's free of pain, but because it's filled with possibility. Looking back on everything, I've come to realize that pain has a way of shaping us, molding us into versions of ourselves we never thought we could become. When I first uncovered the betrayal, I thought it would break me completely. And for a while it did. But now, standing on the other side of that heartbreak, I can see that the pain wasn't just an ending. It was also a beginning. It forced me to confront not only what had been done to me, but who I wanted to be moving forward. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is that you don't get to choose what happens to you, but you do get to choose how you respond. At first, I felt like a victim, trapped in a story I didn't write. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I realized I could rewrite the narrative. My betrayal story didn't have to be about pain and loss. It could be about resilience, growth, and finding strength in the most unexpected places. Turning that pain into purpose wasn't easy. There were days when I felt stuck, like I was walking in circles, unable to move forward. But I started asking myself a simple question. What can I do with this? The answer didn't come all at once, but little by little, I began to find ways to use my experience as fuel for something greater. I started sharing my story, not to gain sympathy, but to remind others that they weren't alone. Betrayal can feel isolating, but I've learned that there's power in connection, in letting people see the parts of yourself you once felt too ashamed to show. Through this process, I've discovered a passion for helping others navigate their own struggles. Whether it's a friend going through a tough breakup or a coworker dealing with family drama, I've found that my pain has given me a unique perspective, one that allows me to empathize and offer support in ways I couldn't before. It's not about fixing anyone's problems. It's about reminding them that they're strong enough to face whatever comes their way. I've also started embracing the idea that healing is a lifelong journey. There's no finish line, no moment where you wake up and suddenly feel fixed. Instead, it's about finding joy in the small victories, like laughing at a memory that used to make you cry, or feeling a sense of peace when you think about the future. Those moments are proof that healing is happening, even when it doesn't feel like it. One of the most transformative parts of this journey has been redefining what family and love mean to me. My family may never look the way it once did, and that's okay. I've learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who show up for you, who love you unconditionally, and who remind you of your worth even on your darkest days. And love. Love isn't something to fear because of what I've been through. It's something to embrace, with the understanding that it's okay to set boundaries and protect my heart. Now, as I reflect on everything, I feel a sense of gratitude I never thought possible. Not for the betrayal itself. Nothing could make me grateful for that, but for the person I've become because of it. I've learned to trust myself in ways I never did before. I've discovered passions I didn't know I had. And most importantly, I've found a sense of peace that isn't tied to anyone else's actions or approval. To anyone who's listening to this story and feeling like their world has been turned upside down, I want you to know this. You are stronger than you think. The pain you're feeling right now won't last forever, even though it feels all-consuming. And when you come out on the other side, you'll see that the person you've become is someone worth fighting for. This isn't the end of my story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, resilience, and the knowledge that even in the face of heartbreak, we have the power to rise again. And I hope, wherever you are in your own journey, that you find that same strength within yourself.